thanks for joining us. We are talking today about thriving in turbulence and mastering the art of cultural change in 2024. We've got a great team from Adaptiv across the London office and the Warsaw office today. So everyone you can see on the screen is part of the team here at Adaptiv. We will do some intros throughout the talk. Just some housekeeping before we get going. So we are recording the session. I don't think anyone is visible on camera apart from us, so don't worry too much, but we will be recording the session and we'll make that available after today. So if you want to go back and rewatch anything, then you can do. We'll do questions via Q&A, so you can use the Q&A function in Zoom to drop in questions and we'll save those for the end. If you do use the chat, we'll keep an eye on that as well, so don't feel like if you can't figure out the Q&A function, we won't answer your question, but make the most of those. And we'll be doing some polls as well, just throughout the talk, just to get some audience participation. So keep an eye out for that. The agenda is quite simple. We're doing a brief introduction, and then we're quite quickly going to hand over to David Story. He's going to talk to us about successful cultural change, and we've got some contributions from Amy, Mikhail, Piotr, and Nick. And then we'll finish with the Q&A, and we will wrap up in about 45 minutes' time. So we may go over slightly, depending on how many questions, but we will try and aim to have you all away in about 45 minutes' time. So just very quickly, you might be wondering who on earth is Adaptiv? Who is this team? You probably know a bit about us if you follow us on socials, but Adaptiv, we help organizations scale business agility and transformation with high-performance culture across the globe. We were founded in 2017 by three Aussie guys who are ex-BCG executives, and we've grown really quickly over the last 7 years. So we are across about 10 offices now, and we've done some great things with some great clients all over the world. And you can see some of the main areas that we work in over on the right. But today we want to focus on cultural change. So I'm going to introduce David. David is our London office partner and one of the leadership team at Adaptiv. David's been transforming companies across the world for 20 plus years, David, is that right? And prior to Adaptiv, you were Ernst & Young and led the Scottish consulting teams up there. David, why don't you just introduce yourself and then we'll get into the cultural change content.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Although my title officially is London office lead, you obviously tell from my accent that I hail from a different part of the world. So as Ben rightly said, probably over the last 15, 20 years been involved in, transformations, change, cultural change, whether it be driven by, digital technology adoption or by a need to respond to markets. Organizations are constantly, needing to actually address, that change in the marketplace. So it's probably worthwhile as just diving into, the conversation, I guess. Just to set the context of this is, it's a bold statement to say that we will help you master, cultural change in 24. I guess what this session is really about is to get your perspectives as well. We have a point of view that we'd like to share, based on our interactions with clients and also some from our experiences. But actually, I'd really welcome, good Q&A. And as Ben rightly said, we really want to draw you into the conversation through the polls that we'll issue as we go through here. So I guess, why now? Why important? Why is cultural change important? It always is, I guess. But what we know at the moment in terms of what we're all sort of grappling with, I think is probably the best expression, is there's a lot of global uncertainty, whether that be economic. We've got quite a lot of conflict, political unrest. There's a lot of economic volatility in the market at the moment, and that's putting quite a strain on organisations' ability to respond to that. Technology shifts, with the rapid advancements around, people's adoption of technology, their expectations of technology as customers, but also with AI, and really kind of changing the game, specifically in the workplace. That's actually driving organizations to really review, roles, responsibilities, operating models, and looking at innovation as well. And I guess probably a big one for us is, what is the change in the workforce? The demographics, the dynamics of the way that people want to work now. So, we've obviously come through, the pandemic, and, people have adopted, new hybrid work models of different flavors and varieties to a lesser or greater extent. Some successful, I think everyone's still trying to find how that's going to land. There's a lot more focus on employee well-being. That work-life balance sort of mantra that's been used over the years has shifted. I think there's much more expectation from employees in the workforce now in terms of employee value proposition, the focus on, purpose, meaningful work, as well as driving a complete change in terms of employees' expectation and forcing leaders to really behave in a different way. Next slide, please, Ben. And I guess from our perspective, the things that we would say, when the position's unclear, what can you do as a leader within an organization with that volatility that's extreme at the moment, is really say, okay, how do we align employees around what we stand for? What's our shared values? Do we have a unified mission and a goal that drives us? Do we have a cohesive identity, or are we just a collection of people that are kind of placed together in a kind of some random fashion? That's not strictly true, but sometimes it feels like that. I guess adaptability to me is probably the key success factor actually out of all of this, which is if we can actually inculcate a capability to adapt in an organization, irrespective of the level of external disruption, volatility in the market and in the ways of working, we can actually empower people to operate in a different way so that they can adapt and the organization can adapt to that change, in a healthy manner, as opposed to lurching from extreme to extreme. Resilience is about, do we really have, a sustainable approach to change? Because again, different pressures in organizations force leadership to make decisions around, is there stability in the way that we're going to market? Is there stability in terms of our operating model? Do we have a good foundation as an organization? Are we cohesive around how we actually operate? So, there are some real challenges for leadership to address. I guess why it's important now is that we've been talking to a lot of our clients, and the reason that we went for the topic that we are in this webinar is because in most of those conversations, cultural change becomes, the keystone of the discussion. So we felt that it was a good opportunity for us to sort of explore this in a bit more detail. Next slide, please, Ben. And just to put it out there, I guess we don't have an absolute formula. There is no menu for cultural change. I think, in my opinion, cultural change is negotiated with all the elements of the organization and everybody within the organization. But one thing I do think that we've seen, and I can believe in, is that in order to achieve what we would say around that high performance organizational culture, which is what we're talking about here, you must design it. It must be intentional. And if you are running transformation and change programs, it needs to pay attention to your prevailing culture, so that you don't actually unintentionally affect the culture in a negative way to a detrimental point. And particularly at the moment, in order to create that capability to adapt through the storm, we need to create, that adaptability to manage the complexity in the storm, as it were. So that's our position. That's kind of the starting point for the conversation between us. Next slide. And again, this is quite a complex area, and there's people that have, written theses about, culture and what we mean and how is it demonstrated. But from our perspective, we've tried to keep it relatively straightforward and thinking about what do we think is the starting point in terms of building, a high performance culture. And typically, from our engagements and from our client experiences and from over the years when I've been doing this type of work, is if we don't have alignment as an organization, we don't have a common and shared goal, then that's problematic. So if we do have good alignment, and it's not to say that each of these particular building blocks, you need to be excellent in all of them, but you do need to be aware of where you stand with all of them. And if they're not in place to an extent, then you will struggle to inculcate this high performance culture that we mentioned too. Autonomy is, are we empowering our people to make decisions within a framework? If everything has to go up 4 or 5 levels or across 15 signatures to get anything done, then pretty quickly, any kind of empowered teams are going to struggle with that. Transparency, are we open? Are we authentic in the way that we engage? Do we create real clarity around the type of work? What's our priorities and how we go about doing things the way that we want to do them? So transparency is also key. I would probably say those are the foundations that we must build upon. I guess the thing that you will get from that then is you start to inculcate a sense of trust because everybody's aligned around a common goal. We've allowed them autonomy to make decisions as teams. We've created transparency in our communication, our two-way communication, so we understand why we're doing what we're doing. And that then creates a sense of, well, actually, there's a degree of trust here in terms of we trust that the leadership are heading in the right direction. And then there's a lot of discussion at the moment, and it's quite a hot topic, is around psychological safety. What do we mean? So are we free to be ourselves within the environment? Are we free to challenge? Are we free to express an opinion that might not necessarily be what is popular? So that psychological safety as part of that operating environment in which we try and create is quite important. And not to be sort of not to ignore it, diversity and inclusion, but we know that that's the cornerstone. The diversity of thought, diversity of culture, diversity of characteristics within a workforce and across cross-functional teams is incredibly important. So, and are we conscious and intentional about designing that in to the way that we work? So, this is our perspective. We think that if you get these things broadly in place, it'll start you on the journey to that high performance culture. Ben. Next slide. So if we start with alignment, one of the things we wanted to do through this was not just have me talking at you, but one of the things we wanted to do was poll you on your specific your viewpoint, I guess. So Ben, can you launch the poll? I mean, I guess the question is, in your organization, which of these factors in the poll do you find the most challenging in achieving alignment within your organization currently? So if you can take a couple of minutes to sort of have a think about that and respond to the poll. I mean, I guess for us, alignment is really around, are we in our strategic outcomes, do we align the prioritization and the way that people work to that alignment? Do we have alignment across leadership teams? Do we have alignment across teams? A lot of what you see in terms of siloed conflicts of interest, different priorities, dysfunction across teams emerges from the fact that we're not working across the organisation towards a common shared goal, which is well understood. If you sit in a boardroom and you ask, the 6 or 7 board members, what do you think our strategy is and what do you think the biggest priority is? Most of the time you'll probably get, a different answer from each of them. They might be broadly in the same area, but one of the things we have to work quite hard upon is really looking at that alignment across leadership team. Don't know if we got the results on the poll, Ben.
We do. We've got a good amount of responses, so thank you guys for getting stuck in. So we have a fairly even spread, although there is a weighting towards organizational silos.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that comes from the fact that when, as I say, you might sit in a leadership team or even in a team dynamic, and everybody leaves the room with a slightly different understanding of what was being discussed. So I think spending a bit of time making sure and checking that understanding that we're actually in agreement as to what it is that we're trying to do. And we've got that clear alignment around the goals and priorities because as soon as everybody leaves that room, they'll work on what they think is important. So that absolute clarity around alignment is really important. Um, I guess, I mean, there we are. So it is the organizational silos. And I guess how do we, so the starting point for getting rid of them is actually, are we working towards a common goal? I would say. Interestingly, divergent goals and priorities is probably tied second with communication breakdown. It doesn't appear that most of the folk on this call they've got a clear strategic direction, which is interesting. So it's more by the time that comes into the organisation, the divergent goals and priorities are actually what's creating the organisational silos. So thank you for that. I guess in terms of things that we do typically is try and make sure that one, leadership's aligned around strategic priorities and that they understand what that means. And we do that in bite-sized chunks where we put in, quarterly delivery cycles based on that strategy to drive those outcomes. and that can bring, amazing team engagement. One particular case study that we'll make reference to, happy to share these afterwards, actually, improved team engagement because it was very clear. Everybody understood what they were trying to do out of that engagement. So alignment, number one, making sure leadership teams are aligned around common goals is got to be in place. Otherwise, we're all at odds. Can we flick to the next one? Autonomy is an interesting one because one of the things that you often find with teams is that people will crave autonomy. Actually, when you give people autonomy without a framework in which to guide it, it leads to more confusion than anything else. And actually, sometimes people don't necessarily feel empowered within the organizational construct to make decisions, because it quite can sometimes be quite uncomfortable. So, what can we do about that? I guess, again, if we can run the poll, Ben, what level of autonomy does your team currently experience? And I guess for us, it's particularly when you start talking about continuous improvement, when you talk about, scaling business agility and agile ways of working, there sometimes can be a degree of reluctance by line management to enable people to take those decisions and empower them to do that. So having some structure in place around how do we do that in a kind of methodical way, which provides a framework in which people can operate. And it also helps leadership to make decisions as to what degree of autonomy is appropriate in each scenario. So that was probably what we'd see quite a lot. I guess one of the things that we've done in terms of autonomy and some clients, I'll probably pull in Piotr on this one. Piotr, do you want to talk about the project that we've got here as a case study in terms of how that worked, specifically about fostering autonomy?
Yes, thank you, David. Let me give you an example of how important autonomy is. Recently, we supported a large global organization on a project focused on streamlining of employee-related processes like time reporting, reimbursements, and this kind of stuff. So we worked across a number of countries, and with such approach, in such context, the client had relatively bad experiences from the past, usually very slow decision-making, usually a lot of complexity related to the local regulations, local laws. So this time we tried to do it in a different way. We involved everyone. We started with a design sprint including representatives from the countries. And in this design sprint, we prototyped a solution that was then implemented country by country by a team with a large degree of autonomy. And we also supported the teams in this autonomous approach. We provided coaching, we kind of reinforced this autonomous culture, and we had great results with such approach. Thanks to autonomy and involvement, we have not only overachieved the project objectives, we had reduction in cycle times of some of the processes by something like 50%, but we also realized the benefits of this approach in 4 months versus the 18 plus months that the client typically worked on a project like that. So autonomy and involvement was key to success in this case. Thank you.
Thanks, Piotr. Can we have a look at the poll results, Ben? Is that possible?
Yeah, let me share those now. Thanks, guys, for sharing your thoughts. You should be able to see these now. So we've got a kind of a cluster in the middle, really. So moderate autonomy with occasional check-ins and limited autonomy with regular supervision, taking up the bulk of the responses. And we have 3 people saying they have high autonomy with minimal oversight, and no one saying that they have no autonomy, which is interesting.
That's quite encouraging, actually, because you would be worried, I think, if you didn't have any autonomy to make decisions. But it does happen, in particularly sort of command and control environments sometimes. But it's interesting and I guess part of autonomy is what's appropriate, in the circumstances. To what extent do you want people to be autonomous? There might be some very highly safety critical issues that you might not necessarily want people to have a high degree of autonomy. So again, there's no absolutes here, but like recognizing and designing intentionally the level of autonomy and making sure people understand what they are empowered to make decisions on is really important. So, um, yeah, that's a huge one. So, can we move on to the next one, Ben?
Yeah.
This one, transparency is one is like, do we know what we're doing, right? Is it across the team? So, can we actually visualize the work? Do we understand what other teams across the organization are doing, right? So there's transparency. Where most sort of change and most issues and dysfunctions and conflicts arise are across those silos that were mentioned earlier on, where typically teams actually don't really understand what's important to the team that's inheriting the package of work or the piece of work, or maybe there's a document or whatever those things are. It tends to be at the boundaries between teams where actually conflict tends to arise and actually waste and dysfunction. So if we're very good in terms of going across the teams, in terms of transparency of how work gets done, from an end-to-end point of view, it makes a huge difference. And then the other aspect to that is, how do we communicate? So have we got a regular cadence of communication that actually gives us a bit of structure and guidance as to when we're going to get an update on something? Because the worst thing is nature abhors a vacuum, and what happens is people will fill the vacuum. So if we create good mechanisms, good two-way feedback mechanisms around communication, then that's great. The other aspect about transparency is there are no should be, and the ideal scenario is no hidden agendas, right? So if we're very transparent and we enable people to ask us questions that we might find challenging, that creates an environment which we'll talk about when we talk about trust. If people feel free to ask the questions that are bothering them and also ask questions that might be perceived as, you should already know this, then we're actually creating a better environment. I mean, I guess on this one particularly, it's about how do you move from siloed functional organizational structures to, much more sort of transient value streams across the organization. And one of the case studies that we've identified here is where we've actually lifted team morale by 60%. And again, it's not none of this is rocket science. If you create hierarchies that are functionally siloed, that they don't communicate across the organization, then you're not going to particularly be successful. So can we flick on to number 4, please? Okay, so on this one, this is probably an outcome of, if you get, let's say, you get your alignment, you're clear about your goals, you're give a degree of autonomy and self-empowered teams so they can manage the work themselves and they can get stuff done. And we're transparent and allowing people to ask questions, and we share information and insight, and we don't hide things, we don't have hidden agendas, and everything's as transparent as is possible. Then actually it creates a bit of an environment which is about trust, right? So what you really want to try and do here is sort of have a think about, how do you test for trust in an organization? Because it's something that you feel, it's not something that necessarily happens by itself. So, what you often see, particularly in organizations where, there's a disconnect, and there's a stress point between, let's say, leadership and workforce, because that trust hasn't been inculcated, and that's as a function of transparency. So if we can actually try and understand where we are, by looking at a behavioural maturity index around some of the behaviours that drive trust, that gives us a bit of insight into what we need to then focus on. And what you see on the right-hand side here is that in the slide is typically with a team, what we would try and do when we engage with a client is to try and understand, where are the strengths in the organization around building trust and where are the gaps? And sometimes it's not necessarily always easy to see until you actually do that analysis. So I don't know, Mikhail, do you want to talk to this?
Sure. Hi, Michał Rosolowski, senior consultant. Did introduce myself. So, so like trust building in general happens in most of our cases because there are no healthy interactions without trust, and Agile is built on interactions, right? And the typically lack of trust in the leadership team translates to the rest of the organization. So we often start at the top level, and one of our clients who was a non-profit organization providing mental health support in Canada. They basically needed us to develop a learning and development program for their leadership team so that they can face the new challenges that they were having. So as a company, we defined some norms for them and desired behaviors, and we did this together with the board and the CEO. We also run some workshops dedicated to so that people can share their aspirations, concerns, and we included CEO. And that contributed to making more transparent, more honest workspace for effective governance of this company. And there are more examples, like for one of the IT organizations, we built trust between software developers and testers. So I am a software developer, and we sometimes work with them. Yeah, so trust is hard to measure in general. We measure behaviors sometimes that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. We also identify good things on our clients that happened due to trust. Right? For example, project sponsors finally agreed to some kind of decisions, or they agreed to something because we convinced them and we built trust between them and us. So yeah, trust is basically a product of alignment, transparency, and many other factors, basically, and it happens every time on our cases. Thank you. Yep.
Thanks, Michal. Yeah, I guess, as I say, it's more of an outcome, but you have to, again, try and create an environment where trust can thrive. So doing some diagnostics and doing some assessment upfront as to where the gaps might be in terms of the behaviours that drive trust is crucially important, we believe. I'll hand over to Amy now. You're going to take us through the next two building blocks.
Yes, thank you very much, David. So yeah, I'm Amy. I am a project lead from our London office. And I just want to kind of build on where we've already come from the three kind of foundational blocks leading into trust. And something that people often think that is very similar to trust is psychological safety. It's slightly different and it has different kind of meanings around it, but there's 4 key areas of psychological safety which organisations really need to drive to help accelerate cultural change. The first one being inclusion safety. So do I feel included in my organisation? Learner safety. So do I feel able to learn with what I'm doing, to make errors, to fail? All of those things help drive innovation. Contributor safety. So do I feel like what I'm doing contributes to our overall goals? And then the last one, challenger safety. So do I feel able to challenge the organisation to improve, to be better, to grow? So each of those different elements is critical for any high-performing inclusive team. Now, we have got a poll here as well. So I do want, Ben, can you just launch that poll for us? I want to see how people currently feel in their organisation. So this is just about how psychologically safe you feel right now. So we'll give you a few minutes to answer that. But what we often see with the organisations that we work with is whilst some areas of psychological safety are easier to achieve, most organisations focus on one or two. So for example, as we've said, learner safety, we often see with organisations shifting to agile ways of working, because predominantly it's always about test and learn. We want to test our approach, learn from it, continue to iterate, and that is all about learner safety. Contributor safety as well, that's all about, have we got goals that we're aligned to? Do we understand the direction that we're going in? But the result of that means that not every organisation, and quite often organisations don't focus on all 4 areas of psychological safety. The biggest challenge is the challenger safety. So do people feel able to speak up when things aren't going the right way? Now, there's lots of things that we do around business agility, transformations, ways of working that can help inspire psychological safety. But ultimately, this is a massive shift in the way we think, the way we do things. And it doesn't happen overnight. A bit like trust, it has to be built and it has to be grown. We have to kind of grow it. So Not sure if we've got any results through yet on psychological safety, Ben.
We do. We've got a 70% of everyone sharing some thoughts, which is great. So
Brilliant.
you should be able to see these now.
Yes, lovely. So it looks like a lot of you feel very safe, comfortable expressing opinions, which is a really great place to be. So what the other thing that we also sometimes see is that there's pockets of psychological safety around organizations where particular teams or departments feel a lot more safe than others. And that's something that we see frequently that we ultimately want to try and avoid. With the things that we've spoken about today, autonomy, alignment, trust, all those things help drive psychological safety overall, and psychological safety will then act as an accelerator to culture change. But there's one more thing that I think I want to talk through today, that we see. It doesn't sit necessarily as an individual building block, but it sits as something that we see as very important to any culture change, and that's equality, diversity, and inclusion. Now, I know there has been a question that's already being asked about this in the chat, so I'll touch upon that question as part of the answer. But
Amy,
yes,
just before you go on to that, on the psychological safety piece, I think it's really interesting about how you talk about the pockets of this happening and how some teams and structures have it. I've experienced in different organizations different levels of this as a maturity, and I think I guess one challenge can be if your organization is in a regulated industry and you have a conservative culture, and perhaps a lot of the people in the organization have been there for a long period of time, and that can lead to people having not quite a group think, but a very pointed look at people coming in with an outside opinion or an outside view and how that works. And that was something I found personally challenging in a particular example somewhere in my career, without naming any names. And it was not something I think anyone was aware of at the time. It was just like, oh, why would they say that? Why would they dare to do that? And it's interesting that organizations and the poll results are demonstrating that, we are moving beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, you won't be alone. I think all of us will have had some level of experience where we felt like that, and we've seen that in organizations. We are seeing a shift in that mindset. And a lot of when we talk about culture change, you talk about the processes and the policies, the things that we can, the black and white stuff that we can change. That's kind of quite clear. But it's still, even once you've changed a process, once you've changed the way you work, it takes a while to change the mindset of people and some of those mindsets that you just spoke about. And you have to go through the what we call the change curve on people's. This is ultimately psychological safety is about people's emotions. It's how they feel in the moment. No matter how many processes we put in place, it's not easy to change the way people feel from a kind of safety point of view. So it takes time, but we're definitely seeing a shift in some of the organisations that I've worked with over the last few years. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so equality, diversity, and inclusion. As we've said, it kind of sits separately from the building blocks in the sense that it is absolutely critical to get right to really drive cultural change. We know that employees nowadays look for things like equality, diversity, and inclusion practices. They want to know what an organisation is doing in this place, more so than ever before. Establishing this kind of diverse and inclusive environment helps us drive belonging across all of our employees. We know that people that are in this space, they feel kind of it helps drive business results, innovation, and decision making. So it has a huge impact if we get it right. The challenge we often find is that this is quite a new and emerging area. Diversity and inclusion has been around for a while, but there's still a lot of unknowns in this place. We still don't know how to predominantly get this right every single time. I don't think there's any organisation that can say that they have got, they're in a perfect place from an ED&I perspective. We're continually learning, and that makes it challenging because we're trying to navigate many different complex situations. And And it's not just about, do I have a diverse group of people, or do I have a group of people who feel included? This is about equality, belonging, equity. And it's something that we as an organisation have been passionate about for a number of years, and that we have actively tried to work on for ourselves as well. So I want to share with you not something that we've done specifically with our clients, but things that we've done internally as Adaptiv to help drive some of our practices. So something that we often hear about in organizations is blind spots, or in people. All of us as individuals have what we call blind spots. And it's things that we are unaware of, that are shaped by our values, our beliefs, and our experiences, ultimately our backgrounds and where we've come from. We actively try to leverage diversity of thought. We place our people at the heart of what we do and the discussions we have around topics that we think are important. And what that's meant for us over the last 12 months is that we've been able to develop a more inclusive employee value proposition that actually meets the needs of individuals rather than just encompassing what we think they need. We've also changed our parental leave policy. So our parental leave policy was a maternity and paternity policy. That's now parental leave. Some of the things that sit within that have changed as well. But to do that, what we've done is leverage our workforce. So we've had regular workshops, and actually what you can see on the right-hand side of this screen is some of the takeaways from some of our workshops, where we've asked for people for their opinion for what matters, what they need, and what we can do to help them grow. We predominantly in the consulting world are in a situation where a lot of senior people in this industry are male, and Adaptiv recognised that, and they wanted to do more to understand how we can better support the women across consulting, and understand what they needed to be successful in this industry as well. So we've had many workshops and kind of feedback sessions with women across Adaptiv to understand the needs and ultimately put things in place for them as well. So it's something that, like I say, is very challenging for organisations to do. It's something that we as Adaptiv take very seriously, and that we want to work with. And it's something that we do talk to other organisations that we work with about as well. It's not always something that we can drive change with, but I think as a topic, it's important to recognise that we do need to get this right to really drive true cultural change.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy.
That's all right. So I'll wrap us up and give people an opportunity to ask some questions. I know there's been a few questions already in the chat, so people will want to, we'll answer those and people get a chance to answer more. So as we've said, we started off with David telling us about some of these kind of the high performance culture, why it's important, and some of the building blocks to success. So we know there's a number of different things. We know alignment, autonomy, and transparency will help drive trust and psychological safety. We know diversity and inclusion is important to all of these different things and helps accelerate our success within the culture change world. Last two things to call out. When you are working across teams or organisations and you hit a challenging time, so we've talked about the turbulent times of next year potentially, when you hit a challenging time, quite often organisations revert back to what they know or what they feel comfortable with. So for example, there's less autonomy. Leaders start to become more, they might start micromanaging more, wanting to know more detail of what's going on and reducing the autonomy they give to teams. That's a surefire way to damage all the good work you've done with culture change going forwards. So it's something to be aware of. And the last thing is that high performance culture is not something that you achieve and then it's just there. You have to continually work at it and continually improve on any one of these things to maintain it. It's very easy to lose very quickly, and then not easy to build back. So it is really tough to do, but something that ultimately pays dividends in the long run. So that leaves us, kind of wraps up what we wanted to share with you today. But as I say, this is all about you as well. We give you a chance to ask questions. Ben, I think we've got a couple of questions that have already gone through. So I don't know if you want to call those out specifically.
Yeah.
As panelists.
Yeah, we've got some great questions. So thank you guys. And we've got about 5 minutes left, so we should be able to get through them. The first question, so what has Adaptiv done to pursue equity and inclusion, especially about the cultural webinar to elevate your experience from BCG? And was there discussion and consideration of the group you have presenting today? Who wants to take that?
Yes.
Amy.
Yeah, of course. I think we've touched a little bit upon what we have done at Adaptiv and the importance of kind of ED&I practices for us. There was discussion around who is best placed to talk on the webinar today. And it's a fine balance between the experts in the region. We are still a small business and we have got a limited number of people in the region. So it was a balance between having the right people in the region and having, picking people from a diverse background, for example. There is diversity among us for different reasons. And it's something to remember is obviously diversity is not always something that we can see. For example, myself, I'm also classed as disabled, so from a diverse group in that way as well. So yes, it was a discussion that we had ahead of today.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. Next question is a great one. So going back to, I think, one of the building blocks we talked about, trust and team morale, or perhaps it was transparency, but team morale, we mentioned with a client, we achieved a 60% improvement. And the question is, how did you calculate the team morale, the 60% improvement? Mikhail, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the morale boost that we referenced is a result of a team health check score that we do with our clients. So basically, together with the client's organization, we help them design their own multidimensional health check score with the factors like, is the team having fun or not? Is the team, does the team have enough space for learning or not? Does the team feel they are delivering value or not? And on a regular basis, the team updates the health check score. And the morale conclusion was derived from that health check. So at some point of time, the results of that team health check went up by almost 60%. So yeah, that's probably what I can say at this point, right? It's custom for each client, but we have a large pool of like inspirational things that every team can use because it has to stick with them and it has to stick with the specifics of a given company. That's how I would answer.
That's a great answer. Cheers, Mikhail. And just if you want to get going with this, you can start very simply. You can start asking your team on a daily, on a weekly basis, how are you feeling? You can craft your own question and just start to get that frequent feedback from team and build it over time. So there's no reason to wait if you want to start to capture team morale.
Yeah, you can give them like 3 simple smiley faces asking how was work today, and ask them to leave the office or close the computer with smiling face, neutral face, or sad face being left. That's it. Thank you.
Cheers, Mikhail. We've got 2 more questions. So the next question, we're a small business in the energy storage sector with a high potential for growth in the upcoming years. We recently established an Agile Workflow on the leadership level with a focus on product development delivery. Do you have any tips on scaling this to a company-wide Agile Workflow, not only on the delivery side, but also on the sales, marketing, and finance side? That is a big question. We might want to follow up on that one. That's meaty, but does anyone want to touch on it here on the panel? David?
Yeah, Ben. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll have a go at it, but yeah, I think it's a follow-up question, but I guess it's where if you look at it from an enterprise perspective, because you might have done it across a specific team, but then how do you actually do both a bottom-up build in terms of those practices, but also a top-down build? So typically we would work with leadership teams to have a look at what are the strategic priorities for the organization over a quarterly, and then define those within what we would call a quarterly delivery sort of planning rhythm or cycle, where you actually align some of the cross-functional teams, whether it be marketing, the operations, against those strategic priorities, and then look at the team and say, right, how do we deliver that across that period of time is one way of doing it. But it's probably worthwhile just sort of looking at what is it that you're trying to do in terms of that actual delivery and that improvement of performance over those teams from a functional point of view. So it's probably, I'd probably say, Maritz, it's probably a follow-up question, but happy to pick that up offline, I think.
Yeah, it's a great question. Go on, David.
Sorry, on you go, Ben. No, I was just, I'll probably leave this next one to Amy. But I guess actually, more it's like Adaptiv in terms of size and scale, we're only, 165 employees globally. So probably kind of we wrestle with this one ourselves. So Amy, I'll pass that one to you to answer if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So question is just any recommendations on D&I for a small business that are located in a rather remote location. So look, you can't boil the ocean, okay? So you will not get every element of ED&I right the first time, and you can't change everything all in one go. This is about the small changes that matter to your people and to your organization. The important thing with anything ED&I related is that we are actively and consciously trying to make a change and make a difference. So it's about taking small steps to go in the right direction, as opposed to trying to change everything at once. Like I say, with Adaptiv, it's something that we have recognised that we want to improve on, and therefore we're taking things bit by bit, policy by policy, those sorts of things, looking at people as individuals and working out what can we do to be better. And as long as we are continuing to work on what do we do each day to be better, we're going in the right direction. And that's the important thing to remember.
And if I could just add on that one, because I think so with Adaptiv, we've launched a load of employee value proposition schemes and initiatives over the last couple of years. But initially there was a big roadmap of all of the things that we wanted to do, but there was a clear section where we said we're going to start here and we're going to focus here. We're not going to try and do everything at once. And actually, the last couple of years, we've iteratively moved through different areas that are going to really add some value to us as an organization from a D&I perspective. So I think it illustrates that point. It's not trying to do everything and solve every problem in one go, but getting some focus on what's important right now. Let's tackle that first, get that right, and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Guys, we are... Go on, David. Go for it.
No, it was just because one of the things that was important about that conversation was there's a lot of transparency around that conversation within the organisation, which helps people understand it's not that we're not going to do these things, but we actually have only got so many resources. To your point, small organisations can't necessarily address most of that. And I guess if I was to say one thing about cultural change in a really simple way, and I think, Mikael, you hit it right on the head, which is if you actually ask your people and you engage your people in this dialogue, because it's co-created culture, it's not a top-down exercise. The biggest and most important thing I've learned over driving 20 years of organizational transformation and change is if you don't involve the people that are going to be impacted or influenced by the change, you have to get them directly involved in the design if you can. And if you do that, then you'll get closer to getting it right, shall we say, than the other way. So, if I could say anything, it is about engaging your teams in the dialogue around this stuff is super important. Sorry, Ben, I'll pass back to you.
No, that's good. We're 4 minutes over. Thank you guys so much for your engagement. Just to finish, this is the team from Adaptiv that you've seen today. Feel free to reach out to any of us and talk further about anything you've heard today. Just particularly draw your attention to Nick, Piotr, and David. So Nick is our growth partner for the European region. Piotr leads our Warsaw office. David leads our London office. Please feel free to reach out to any of those guys to talk more about anything you've heard today. And then you've got myself, Amy, and Mikael as well. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn, reach out to us with any questions. And we look forward to seeing you, speaking to you again soon, potentially at another webinar or in person. Thank you, everyone.